Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to the keepers and players of Call of Cthulhu and other investigative horror games. I'm Seth Skorkowski.
And I'm John Hook. And together we'll discuss writing, game mastering, and player tips, and how you can apply those to your table. In this episode, we're talking about the ecology of the Yithians.
That's the Great Race of Yith, too, sir.
The Great Race. Yes. little snooty patooty on their part, I think.
Did you name yourself this, Mr. Yithian?
Exactly, right.
The Yithians, which was weird, when I first really started reading Lovecraft a lot, I somehow missed his story, The Shadow Out of Time, kind of like my first round. So like I first became aware of them as like a Call of Cthulhu Lovecraftian monster when I played the Dark Corners of the Earth video game.
Oh, okay.
And that was a bit of a shock because one of the subplots, like deep subplot, like you forgot it's a subplot that they laid out at the beginning, is your character had blanks in their memory. And a lot of weird stuff that they don't remember happened and all this. And then they would have these flashbacks periodically. When I'm playing, I'm like, what the hell is this about? And then at the end, you actually see the Yithians as your memory comes back. And I had no idea what they were. So I'm like, what the hell is this? Like these giant conical things, and you're writing something in the book and it reveals that you're one of these things, and you put the book on the shelf. I was completely baffled.
That's
and then
hilarious.
I later read about Yithians, like, oh, those are cool. But I had
funny.
like the John Q. Everyman response of like, what the hell is this?
That's funny. Yes, I've said it before. My introduction to Lovecraft's literature was through the role playing game. So I learned about the role playing game first. I played the role playing game first, but soon after I was introduced, and the scenarios I played. I mean, I was a teenager. They were straight up fight monsters, right? So it was, fighting deep ones and fighting ghouls and things like that. So, but it interested me enough to then start seeking out the literature. And so I then dove into the literature. And so my introduction to the Great Race was through the story. I did read Shadow Out of Time in a collection of short stories. And, but yeah, you don't see the Yithians used that often in either in scenarios or even in other literature and stuff. So I feel like they're a little underused. I think they're misunderstood, which is why they might be underused.
I agree on both. Part of the reason that makes it really difficult to use them is because they're in a different time than when the investigators are around. They're also not, I don't know, they're not evil, I guess. Like, they're not, they don't have any out for humanity in any way. They're, if nothing else, the most interested in humans out of all of like the ones, except for the deep ones who look at us as like potential breeding. But the Yithians are just fascinated with this from like the scientific point of view. But,
I mean, yeah, I say I agree with you for like most of that thought. I feel like Yithians, not all the way, sir. Because Yithians, their perspective on history is vastly different than our perspective on history. Because for Yithian, they might be viewing history from a very far distant point in the future, our future. So for us, this might be their past from a certain point of view. We're also in their future because, their bodies are, 200 million years in the past behind us. But Yithians being benign, I'm not sure that's completely true, because what if a Yithian, through their calculus, they have determined that a a certain level of deaths have to occur, and so there's a Yithian possessing a human body right now, who's going through and he's in the process of setting stuff up for just an absolutely massive, you know, mass death event. I mean,
Well,
there's a scenario right there where you're going to try and stop, the mass death event.
I could see the sense of we have to prevent the humans from discovering this site or inventing this technology that later on could hurt us when we take back over. So we are going to cause these events to transpire in order to stop them from damaging our interests that take place after they're done. Like, the reason we haven't had a thermonuclear war is not from us, it's because they have gone back and prevented historical events from occurring. That way, we don't wipe out our own planet that they're going to be inheriting one day.
Hmm.
Um, so, I guess just to kind of give our listeners who might not know about the Yithians what in the heck we're talking about, let's real quick kind of give like a summary of what they are.
Let's do that. Howard Phillips Lovecraft created the Great Race of Yith in the story The Shadow Out of Time. It was published in June of 1936 in an issue in the June 36 issue of Astounding Stories, which I find interesting that we are recording this in June now. So that means this story is now 87 years old as we're
Yeah.
recording this. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. It's also like way more creative than much of the stuff that's come out in the 86, 87 years since then.
Right?
Um, so the Yith are they were originally aliens from the planet Yith, which I think is only named once in the story. Like he just calls them the Great Race, and then at some point he's like, "Well, they were from Yith," and then Call of Cthulhu and the other people afterwards have called them the Great Race of Yith. But uh, I think at first they were just the Great Race, kind of like the Elder Things were just called the Elder Things. I don't think anybody knows what the heck they were actually what they
Right.
called themselves.
Because weren't they for the elder things, weren't they like the old ones? And then they started calling them the elder things. But yeah, so
Yeah.
you had the Great Race, who happened to be from Yith, so now it's the Great Race of Yith. And I couldn't find in the research I did, are you aware, do we have any idea what their original form was? Was it corporeal? Was it, gaseous? Was it thought only? Do we have any idea of what a Yithian's
No.
natural Yith planet form was? No? Yeah, I
No.
have no idea.
But so they were about to have a cataclysm of some type, and I had thought the original cataclysm had to do with the flying polyps. And then when I was reading a lot of the Call of Cthulhu literature, it sounds like the flying polyps didn't come around till afterwards. But they had a cataclysm, and these are the only race that has essentially mastered time, like time travel or seeing in the future, and they can through technology seize individuals either forwards or backwards in time and transfer or swap minds with them. So on prehistoric Earth, long ago, there was evidently a race of these giant 10-foot tall super snail things with big conical bodies and these clacking claws and whatnot. And the Yithians looked at those. So they said, those will do. And they, as an entire planetary species, or I guess as a lot of them, swapped minds with these snail creatures in Earth's history, which means those things, from their point of view, they were suddenly in foreign bodies, whatever those looked like, right as a cataclysm hit, which,
Right.
sucks for them. Um,
So much for your benevolent Yithian theory.
I said towards humans.
Oh, towards humans. Okay. All right.
They don't find us good enough to take over, and at least not permanently. So they came to Earth. They built these large cities. They had technology. They had some sort of airships, and they had these buildings that had ramps because they didn't have legs. They were like almost snail scooting around bodies, and they had like their lightning guns, and they're historians of the future and past essentially. And what they will do as far as in the Call of Cthulhu universe, is they will occasionally reach forward in time and snatch the mind of a person and then experience life through them, often to do some sort of quest. They're doing some sort of job that's important to them, or they're just witnessing the the events going on at that time. And the human that suddenly finds themselves in a giant snail creature body, like they're kind of rewarded with they get to write their biography in these big books that the Yithians keep, and they're there, kind of given freedom with other humans from different times. I think in the original story, like he's talking to like some Mongol warrior and like some aristocrat, and then someone from the future, like who was like some warlord of the 23rd century or something crazy. And but before they return back to the normal time after a certain period, and I think in the story it was like 10 years, 8 years or something that he was.
Yeah, it was a period of years.
um they do a mind wipe on him, like the Men in Black, the little flashy thingy. And so all of a sudden, like, he pops back up in his bike. He doesn't know where he is, and he's halfway through finishing the sentence he was delivering 8 years before. And like everything's gone wrong. He's like become estranged from his family. He has been traveling the world. He's been at like the newspaper. Else he has no memory of any of this. But the technology of a mind wipe evidently is not perfect, and certain things will bring about flashbacks. So that story takes place beginning after he comes back. He's slowly remembering what happened to him. And then in the Yith mythology, they will eventually leap forward in time till after humanity has gone and the beetles have inherited the earth. And then the Yithians will once again rule Earth. So we're kind of existing in that period between the times when Yithians are the masters of Earth, I guess.
Are they beetle? I thought it was bees. Like I thought it was a bee-like race, but it's beetles.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, in my mind, it's always been like a bee kind of thing, But all right, beetles. All right, beetles. All right, I like it.
And and originally he just talked about him as like the beetle race. And then what Call of Cthulhu treated as is they're like swarms. So like a Yithian doesn't go into a beetle, it goes into like this swarm of a couple thousand beetles. And they move as a cloud and they can form shapes and whatnot. And you could kill a couple hundred of them and it doesn't bother the Yithian because its mind is, you know, moving between them
It's been so
as a pod.
segmented.
And the beetles, they'll live, they'll die, they refresh and whatnot. And I first encountered those in the old scenario of Bad Moon Rising, where the player characters do get to go forward in time, and you have to interact with these clouds of beetles. And like that would like each cloud was like different colors, like the shells were all different colors and stuff. So um, also, what a crazy concept of one
Right?
mind per these little hive
Well, it
minds.
makes you wonder what limits. I mean, is there a limit? Could a Yithian swap with several humans and have a collection of humans all linked into a single hive mind? And
Oh,
doing coordinated movements and thought processes.
that is a weird one. I always thought it'd be cool if a Yithian, because how time is crazy for them, like they could take over a human, and then once they're done, take over a human at the exact same time, and then those humans, which are both him or it, I don't think they really have sex so much, are interacting with each other. So the player characters could come across like five people that are actually all the same Yithian, but it's because that Yithian has at separate times taken over five people that all happen to exist at that same time.
That's
And
awesome too.
you would have memories of playing like any of the humans before it. So
Hmm.
like there's one of them, it's like, I don't have any memories of playing any of you. Or there's like another, it's like, well, I remember two of you. And like the fifth one's all like, yeah, I know everything that happens, but we got this. Uh Probably because like it would try something and fail. It's like, well, that didn't work. okay, I'll take over another person and they'll team up. And now I know not to do that thing. And then like they get through the door or whatever. And the guy's like, well, that didn't work. One more time. So eventually it's like five Yithians all doing the same thing.
There is, and I've talked about this on the Miskatonic University podcast. There is an amazing 5-issue comic book series called Weird Detective. It's written by Fred Van Lent, and I'm not sure who the artist is, but it's a good artist. But Fred has, I believe, Fred's also a novelist. He's just got this amazing perspective on Yithians. So this five issue series, a Yithian has taken over the mind and body of a New York police detective, and he has a thing that he's doing, and it's a really cool story. But one of the things that I loved in this series is Lent proposes that Yithians have a wide variety of senses, more so than our human senses, our limited five senses, right? They have 17 senses. And I went through the entire miniseries to try and take notes on all the senses. And even though he says that there are 17, he only lists, I think it's seven, three. Yeah, he only lists seven specifically by name in the miniseries. So there's 10 others that he didn't get around to telling us about. But uh, these will be notes in the show notes, but I mean they're so cool, right? There's the sense of emotion location where you've ever had that thought where, or that feeling where, sure, your body is here, but your mind has wandered and your mind is elsewhere. You're thinking about work, right? You're sitting at home, maybe watching TV, but you're not really watching TV. Your mind is wandered and you're thinking about work. Well, a Yithian will be able to sense that state in a human and be able to actually see your thoughts of what it is that you're thinking about in that whole mind body disassociation kind of thing. There's another kind of cool power where by humming at a certain pitch, you're able to cause a type of sonar, and you can get a sense of things and objects on the other side of a wall, other side of a door. But in addition to that, you resonate that hum at another pitch, and you can physically pass through those solid objects. So you could use it to walk through walls, or as the police detective does in this book, a criminal is running by on the other side of a wall, running down a hallway, and the Yithian detective reaches his hand through the wall, grabs a handful of hair from the criminal, and bashes the criminal's head up against the wall. And so he kind of gets knocked out and slumps to the ground, slowing him down enough for the human partner, detective partner who he's just been saddled with, for her to catch up and arrest the perp that was running away. But yeah, it's there's a bunch of other things in the book too, but they're so interesting, and I feel like that really does um, illustrate that as creators we have permission to make changes and do fun stuff with these Yithians. You can have a Yithian NPC or a Yithian uh, you know opponent, a villain in a story, and he doesn't just have to be a human guy who just has an alien's brain or thought patterns. He could be an alien infesting a human with superpowers.
Yeah, that's cool. That is really cool. I like that. I'm gonna have to check this comic series out. One of the things which Sandy Peterson has with his update to the Yithians is he doesn't subscribe to the beetle cloud theory. he has it where the Yithian beetles are like huge with these like big legs and they can hop great distances. Um, and his concept was the Yithians because they can go to the future, and they knew that eventually the Cthulhu would rise and all this stuff would happen. So like, okay, what we're gonna do, we're gonna take over these human scientists that do genetic stuff, and we're gonna take them over because we know way more science than they do, and we're gonna genetically engineer these. We're gonna create these bugs that we're eventually going to live in. So they designed their future bodies using human scientists and their own technology. And today's theory is like, so these things have been living for like centuries of these like kind of crappy snail bodies that don't move that fast. And they kind of had to like, okay, these next bodies are going to be super sweet. They're going to be like brightly colored and they're going to be able to hop great distances and they're going to have like all these freaking legs and they're going to move all the time and it'll be awesome. So they basically built themselves these like cool Corvette bodies
Yep,
because they could.
rods.
And so that's kind of his origin is they didn't find a species that evolved later. No, they're like, yeah, screw that noise. We're making some sweet killer bodies for ourselves, and then they transferred to them. It did everything before the great old ones basically took out the Earth, and then they just shot out of here on spaceships or whatever it was. But I kind of like his concept of they didn't just wait for the future bodies to evolve. They designed them themselves with this intent of like, well, we've been in a lot of bodies and we've done a poll of what our favorite features are, and we're going to put all of them in our future bodies.
I love that idea. I like the idea of maybe kind of stealing a little bit of story elements from the elder things in and the fact that they created Shoggoths. In that, what if these giant beetles, before the Yithians can take them over, they become sentient and rebel and try and do anything that they can. Maybe they've developed mental defenses, right? And so now there has to be something, some kind of intervention, maybe from humans, to quell these beetles so that they can be tamed enough for the Yithians to take them over again.
These
Who knows? Yeah.
these super beetles. Well, because if they're supposed to house the minds of the Yithians, they probably do have actual like very advanced brains.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, you could have it where like and then some of these beetles, which are sentient, they're not educated, but they're essentially these prisoners in these laboratories. But they're smart enough to figure it out, smart enough to communicate. They've got whatever senses the Yithians wanted to give their future bodies, right? So they've probably got, receptors or whatnot for these 17 senses. And, they're talking to each other through walls. They're like, you know what? We can totally break out of this. And they do. And then you've got the investigators doing it, and they're possibly working for a Yithian in a human body. And the finale is okay, great. You just helped the race that's going to take over when we're done. If you win the scenario, if you beat it, everything goes well. You just essentially helped the inheritors of Earth inherit the Earth better.
That's too funny. Oh my god, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, wait, this is really workable. It could also have a cool twist where if something goes wrong, like your boss has somehow anticipated it because it looked into its own future. So it's like, you get there and your boss shows up and is like, yeah, it's not this way. How do you know we were here? Don't worry about that. But you're disposable. I'm not, because if a Yithian in a human body dies, the Yithian dies. And the human that's in the great race snail body in the past, they just live out the rest of their life in this snail body, which is kind of tragic. And the story talks about they're treated with this respect, but they're trapped there, and which is pretty weird, but it tragic. But like so the Great Race are actually like I don't know, like they don't like throw you in a cage and they're all like, you know, living here for the next 8 years till we're done using your body. They're like they educate you. You're allowed to like fly around on their airships and look at dinosaurs or whatever. And kind of get free reign of their cities. And if they're like, "Oh, we're sorry, the guy who has your body died, and he can't come back, and your body's gone, so enjoy the rest of your life here." And it's like, well, how long did those snails live? Do you live for like the next 500 years? Just in this body that can't talk except for by clacking your claws?
Well,
And
they got the trumpets. They got the little trumpet
oh, they
sounds
got
that
the
they can
like,
do.
yeah, well, they sound like Charlie Brown adults. That
Right.
or the trombone voice.
They're just
And
doing bird calls to each other.
oh, and one other thing was kind of weird is Sandy had done in his stuff, his design of the Yithians. The claws aren't like crab claws where they're hinged at the back. They're like shrimp claws that are hinged at the front, where
Oh,
the claw goes
yeah.
backwards. And I thought it was kind of a cool thing because it was just wasn't how I envisioned them. So
Hmm.
it's like I don't know if that's better, but that's really cool because that's a still correct description. Just wasn't how my brain
Yeah,
had
it's
done it
certainly a
because
more alien visual.
yeah, where it's
That's kind of
that
cool.
that weird backwards claw, like,
Hmm.
like, I think mantis shrimp have that, and mantis shrimp who can see on, like, was it 17 spectrums of light? Well, we've got 3, kinda reminds me of your senses,
Ooh, yeah.
thing. The Yithians are just mantis shrimp, that's all it is. And, now one interesting thing, though, when it does come to them is with time, the Hounds of Tindalos, Tindalos, I've never been able to pronounce that word right.
Tindalos.
Tindalos.
That's how
Uh,
I say it.
yeah, yeah, then you are correct. Uh, the the hounds will chase a person who goes through time, but that's because they're physically going through time. And the Yithians don't seem to have any issue with it because it's just a mental transfer. Since they're not physically breaking the veil of time, the hounds evidently don't even notice them, which is kind of an interesting thing because normally in Call of Cthulhu, if your character time travels, there is a chance that
Hmm.
the worst, most horrific, most sand crushing freaking monster. I hate Hounds of
I love them.
Tindalos, whatever you call them. Well, I hate them as a player, man. They're awful. They can come after you like
Yeah,
quite a time later. While the Great Race are all like, yeah, whatever, and just kind of going back and forth because they're using email rather than snail mail to travel through time.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah. No, they're using email rather than an Uber
Ah,
to
yes.
travel through time. Yeah, it's interesting because would wonder if the Yithians would, if the Hounds of Tindalos would sense the raw power contained within a Yithian, and if something like that level of power would even cow a Hound of Tindalos, and make it back off, because don't they live at opposite ends of the time spectrum? Aren't Hounds of Tindalos like at the very end of time where the abyss of nothingness is on the precipice and they come back, or are they far in the past? Because the Yithians are in the past, and do they? I don't know if they coexist
I
in a
don't
time
know,
period.
but that is now how I will view it. Where the Yithians were at the beginning of time and the Hounds are at the end. At they meet in the middle. But I think that's a really cool concept that the Hounds are essentially backwards
Yeah, that'd be
representation of
cool.
time. And now Yithians also, when they send somebody to the future to do their thing or whatnot, they're not alone. They have cultists. So even though they're not gods, they might present themselves that way to stupid little monkeys that are human. But in
Science of a certain level will look like magic to those who
yeah,
don't understand it.
and it would help them. So humans look at the Yithians almost like angels or something like this. So they do have a cult, but they also will share technology. I guess is one of their currencies. And yeah, I'd mentioned kind of the Men in Black flashy thing reference, but also remember in the Men in Black they talked about they funded the whole organization through certain technology, like we invented the microwave, and all of that. And you could think you could have a company, some super innovative tech company that's actually just a cult of Yithians who have been doing favors for the Yith for some time. And they have this company that's doing some sort of like just cutting edge technology, just, far beyond anyone else. But it's because they're in league with the Yithians. And for doing these favors, they have been given this technology. And then later on, the Yithians are going to use that same technology to build their beetle bodies and get the hell out of here. But uh, so I kind of like the idea of like if the player characters in like it could be modern, it could be 1920s, where you have a company or corporation or some Howard Hughes super inventor. I guess in like the Iron Man flashbacks when his dad was very clearly modeled after Hughes and he had his like
Right,
hover
right.
car and stuff. It's like, well, it's because he's not a Yithian, but he's been doing favors for them. He's in the cult of the Yithians. And that flying car technology they gave him, and he's just trying to figure out how to get it to work with our current understandings of metallurgy and whatnot. So, but the idea of like you've got some sort of like really cool corporation that all the tech bros love, that's just a cult.
Hey, the Yithians can produce and give to humans a temporal communicator, which thinking about the Hounds of Tindalos, they even get pissed off if you're just like looking through a lens into different time periods. So I would have to assume that this temporal communicator is some kind of like secure line, right? That the hounds aren't able to track.
Either that or they understand a way to shield it, or the hounds like I like your idea of like they're like, I'm not messing with this. This is a bigger predator than me.
Yeah,
Uh, in the scenario Bad Moon Rising, which is a cool story. The third act of it isn't a really good scenario because it's mostly telling the players a story, which is awesome, but it's not as that exciting to play. Um, in that one, the conclusion, spoilers by the way, um, is the player characters who have ended up with the Yithians end up going into the future through basically they were put in a suspended animation and awoken after humanity is gone, and they have to talk to these clouds of beetles. At the Yithians stage this elaborate thing to trick them to basically where the player characters are going to become lab rats to test this device to go physically into the future, but so far into the future that the universe has hit its maximum expansion, contracts, becomes a singularity, re explodes, and solar systems reform, dinosaurs happen, and all this, and then it will stop at the same year of that the player characters left, but in a full cycle of the universe's lifespan. So
oh my
it's
god.
it's it's basically telling up a story of what they're seeing out the window at super high speed, like from the old Time Machine movie, right?
Right, right,
Um,
right.
and they end at the time they were from, but things could be different, and it kind of brings up like weird things. But basically, it was this huge ruse just for the Ithias to like, let's see what happens with them. Does this device work? So they weren't going back in time; they were just going so far ahead that time looped back on itself. And that one does have, at the very end, they might see a hound. And the hound is like, what the hell's that? And it might show up later on in like a future adventure because the hounds are like, that was. And I used that in a scenario. It was an elaborate way. I brought a character back who had died because they
Nice.
ended up in a timeline where the character who died in our scenario didn't die. It was another character that died. And where they found each other, they were both like, "You died," and it was this it was a super elaborate way I brought a character back at the end.
That's
But
awesome.
Yeah, it was really fun, but um, not the best scenario to play that unless you've got that sort of ending. But reading it is really cool and gives some really cool insights on them because they have a library on the moon because they put it there because they knew humans wouldn't screw with it. Versus, I guess, the one that's in Australia in the original story where he goes to the ruins in Australia. And
What is Bad Moon Rising published in? I think I might.
the
I
great
think I've
old
seen it.
ones.
Yes. Okay.
I've
I've
run
seen. I've
several
got that one.
scenarios out of that one, and it is one of the most highly imaginative. But like I said, the third act kind of fell flat for me. Uh, and I think the only reason I read it is the first two acts are so good, and the third's a cool story. And I had this killer reveal at the end of how I was going to bring back a player character that had died like three adventures before, and everybody was still mad at me for killing this character, even though they. And it wasn't that I did anything wrong. It's just everybody loved the character and their dynamic with their cousin, who was a different player character. And yeah, the game's not the same since he died, even though it's not your fault that you killed him, but it's just not as much fun. So I ran this whole freaking adventure as this elaborate, like, he's back, bitches, leave me alone. But as a normal scenario, probably wouldn't recommend it without heavy modification. But it's
God, you're an
really
old
cool.
softy.
I am, dude. I am. I always like you should kill your player characters, except really don't. I just bark at them really loud, and then I resurrect them because I don't like to see them sad.
That's funny. That's too funny. Yeah, I was surprised that there really aren't that many. Uh, Considering Chaosium's been publishing scenarios for like 40 years, there aren't that many scenarios that feature or at least contain a Yithian. You know, they may not even be the primary feature.
No, and I was going to say one of the earliest scenarios did have a Yithian, and that was the Asylum from the Asylum and Other Tales. But then you added like they might not be a prominent feature. You're right; it was a side character that the scientist or the doctor that was running this asylum found a boy who was uh, had just had a mind swap happen. So it takes them a while to adapt to these new bodies. So they're just kind of like they can't talk, and their eyes are kind of rolled around. They keep clacking their hands like their claws, and then eventually they acclimate and they go about their thing. And this psychologist or alienist, whatever, recognized what that was, and he held it prisoner and had it put in the shielded room so it couldn't talk to the past. And he tortured and interrogated it for super science, technology, and mythos knowledge that
Oh
the
my
player characters
god.
might stumble across. It's like, but the whole background for like how all this stuff happened is because there's this 12-year-old boy that's got the mind of the super genius Yithian that's been tortured for 3 years. That this guy has been pumping for knowledge. It's just kind of this little side thing that's kind
Oh
of
my
interesting
god.
to come across. Um, and then when we ran it, the same characters were there, and it recognized them from the previous adventure. And yes, elaborate campaign of a lot of disconnected scenarios.
That's
But
awesome.
I think that was the first appearance. You never see it in the cone body. It is exceptionally weak. It was just kind of a thing that was there, and it wasn't like you fought it. It wasn't like you dealt with the truly weirdness of it from the player character's point of view. It was just a really weird child that was like way too smart and moved in a strange way because it didn't move like a human. Because it was just kind of wearing the skin of a boy. It didn't necessarily know how to move right.
Nice. Yeah, I did write a scenario that I don't know if it features. I mean, a Yithian plays a pretty central role, and all of the characters are presumed to have been uh, possessed by a Yithian at one point. Actually, by the one Yithian that's in the scenario. Um, but I came up with this concept to how to draw. Uh, how do you get the police detective and the baker and the reporter and the astronaut, how do you get them all to go and be in the same uh, mission? How do they become pals and be in the same investigation, right?
Oh yeah.
So I came up with this concept that, hey, they had all previously, and all they had no memory of it, you know, part of that whole mythos, part of it. They had no memory, but they had all been possessed by a Yithian, and now that Yithian is kind of calling in favors because uh, a library that they have that's located in the deserts, the Jakarta Desert of India. They know from history that that library is going to be it's going to come under assault at a certain point soon. And the Yithians need that library to stay protected because they need it for a future event, a future war that's coming. So the Yithians basically send out a transmission to all these player characters, and it comes in the form of a nightmare and a buzzing sound and just like static on the TV, and it's so consistent. By the time the scenario begins, your player characters have been living with this constant noisome static and nightmares for like a month. And they're getting sleep deprivation, they're going mad, and the only thing that they can glean out of this static is go to Calcutta. Go to Calcutta.
Get your ass to Mars.
Get
Get
your
your
ass
ass
to
to Mars.
Mars. And so all of these, that's how all these player characters, they can be British, French, German. They can be of whatever background you can conceive of. They are, you know, getting together and getting to Calcutta. I guess the only stipulation I put in the thing is that um, try and be of the Western world because of the route that they're taking and the boat that they're on. Because the scenario basically opens on a steamer, a tramp steamer that everyone has basically hawked whatever in order to get passage aboard, and that's where player characters start to introduce and meet each other. Is they're aboard this little ship that's traveling. I forgot where it's starting, but it goes through the Suez Canal and is heading for Calcutta. So this is where they start, is on that boat. So if you're characters from the Western world, they'd be coming from the other direction, so that they wouldn't be on the boat. But yeah, so I thought that was kind of neat. You get in and you eventually meet someone who's like part of this cult, and he's able to turn off and filter out the static, so that finally you have relief. And so now you're already in Calcutta, and you're meeting this cult leader, and he says, well, the price for helping you is I need you to come to Jakarta with me. So now they go to Jakarta, and then they end up having the big finale in there. But there's a temporal communicator there, and so you're able to have a message from the actual conical Yithian, who appears in a hologram form and talks to the
That's
player
cool.
characters.
I have the PDF, but I haven't read it. I've been holding out, hoping you'd run me. And now you spoiled me, so I guess I can read it and burn my friends to death. But well, it kind of reminds me of. Did you watch the Battlestar Galactica, the 2000s remake one,
Oh yeah,
where uh, all along the Watchtower, for some reason,
yes.
the Chosen as a song starts playing for the characters as the fact that their Cylons gets awoken and they can't stop thinking of this song, or they're kind of humming it as they're trying to like get through the galactic, and they all end up in that same room at the same time. They're like, oh damn.
Oh,
And
you and you and you. Oh man,
so it kind of makes me think that. So like if I read, I would probably just as my Battlestar ode or something, like use that song, or like something else like House of the
nice.
Rising Sun or something. And
Oh, I love that
like
song.
it's great, and it's great for creepiness too. Like
Hmm.
it's a cool song. But you I like that idea of they do that. I also made me think of you could have a and this would work great if you're doing some sort of like a Delta Green or a government agency type thing where you have groups of people who it's almost like survivors of who all it's basically forgot they had periods of their life that they forgot, and like eventually like somebody reaches out and they're like, hey, we're doing a group of people that are have gone through this weird amnesia where they did all this crazy stuff and then they don't remember what happened. And behind the mirror is the government guy who's put this whole thing together, who's like, we know that these people were taken over by Yithians, and there might be changes that have been made to them because of that possession, such as the ability to receive that buzzing noise. Like maybe they have a biological change that's happened, or they were chosen due to certain biological anomalies in them that the Yithian put in us 10 million years ago. But
They've unlocked some of those senses,
yeah, and,
right?
and, and, and these people have no idea, but that they could have weird stuff because they could occasionally reach through something without thinking about it, like that one you were talking about. But our brains don't know how to control it yet, and you've got some guy in a lab coat watching us, going like, "We can totally use these people that don't know that what they are," and then you form a super secret, superhero team. I don't know, but I like the idea of like survivors of Yithian takeover.
I like that idea too. We did our research, and there's only a handful of scenarios that have been published for Call of Cthulhu. We've talked about a few. There's also the Fungi from Yuggoth has the one of the first, if not the first, campaign for Call of Cthulhu called Day of the Beast, and Chapter 2, I think, of that called The Dreamer involves Yithian. Um, uh, I I had forgotten that Games Workshop had a license to do Call of Cthulhu, and there was a scenario published in White Dwarf issue number 60 called "The Bleeding Stone of Ipith" or Ipatia. I'm not
Ipta,
Ipta. I like Ipta.
Ipta. I don't know.
Ipta. That would be kind of cool. From the notes that I saw, it's only 4 pages long, so it's got to be probably just an outline, not really a scenario per se. But there's also a scenario in called "City Beneath the Sands" in Terra Australis.
Well,
I
you'd
saw.
have to at Terra Australis
Oh my
because
god!
the
Yeah,
original story,
Narcotic.
it, it
The city,
it
Narcotic City, is there.
yeah, it all kind of climaxes with going on to the expedition into Australia,
Hmm.
which in the original Call of Cthulhu short story, did that one go through Australia or was it New Zealand that the ship that made it to Relia?
Oh, yeah, it was. I think it was New Zealand. Yeah.
Okay. So it's like Lovecraft being a little guy sitting up in Providence, Rhode Island, was like really liked bringing people down to
Hmm.
that part of the world. So I was like, did he do two in Australia, or was it Australia and New Zealand he hit? Okay. But yeah, you would have to do one in Terra Australia. It's like that would be a crime if they hadn't included
Oh,
the
I know,
Yithian.
right? And of course, well, not of course, but I saw notes for something called the Glendale Fairies. I know nothing about it other than the name. I don't know where it would have been published or when
My
or
my Google
anything.
skills failed me. I kept finding a street address in Glendale, California, that when I was like
Eh,
doing Cthulhu, Glendale, it was all like I don't know if there was like an old address for some publisher or something, but or it was Glendale
yeah,
Street. I don't know, but there was no fairies
yeah.
that I'm aware of.
And the last one I found a note for was called 2 Minutes on High, and it was a scenario published in Unspeakable Oath, issue 11.
Okay,
So very cool. But again, yeah, just a handful
handful.
of
Two of them are magazines.
yeah, yeah. At least two of them are magazines.
And the ones that that I've run were both from the 80s. Uh, Terra Australis, there was an original version of that, wasn't there?
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know if the history of that scenario went back that far, but it is a very underused mythos creature, and which is cool because I think they're awesome because they're truly alien and weird, but they're also not the face eating type of monster.
Yeah, I forgot about the brand new Terra Australis publication, and I just want to look real quick and see if City Beneath the Sands is in here. I bet it is.
I when you had mentioned it, I remember seeing it when I flipped through Terra Australis, but I it had blocked out of my mind when we were talking about the scenario until or about the subject until you mentioned it. Like, oh yeah, yeah, I do own a third one. I also liked in when we spoke to her, Rithana Emrys included the Great Race of Yith in her novel series, where it was the physics instructor at Miskatonic University was a Yithian and had a lot of trouble understanding that humans in their primitive minds couldn't understand physics correctly. And in Ruthana's version of them, uh, Miskatonic University was an important location because there was an archive that was located there. And the Yithians would occasionally oversee protection of one of their archives. So I thought that was an interesting way of also bringing in that, yes, their physics teacher isn't human.
Yeah, I was just looking in the new Terra Australis, and the scenario City Beneath the Sands is not available there. So it must be just in the
Oh,
original first edition, which is fine.
I wonder if they weren't able to get the reprint permission from the original authors. There might be a story there. I don't know, but
Yeah,
it's
who knows?
a lost scenario, which
Yes.
now means the collectability of the first edition has probably just raised the price by several percentage.
We'll wait to release this episode after I've picked it up off eBay then.
Smart, smart.
Awesome.
But there is information on the Yithians in Terra Australis, which I had forgotten about that book. I had just gone through the monster, the Melius Monstora book, and there is a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, it's the
Uh,
stomping grounds, right? I mean, it's one of the original neighborhoods for them, so a lot of
yeah,
cool info in there.
there is one of their cults is called the Lamplighters, so it's got some stuff on that, and it addresses the Hounds of Tindalos, which it says that they actually have clashed with them and that there are scars from these clashes on different parts of the continent where there might be time slips or temporal weirdness due to these time battles uh,
Ooh.
from from their collision with them. So evidently, the hounds do notice them, and things went down. So interesting. I didn't know this. So like, oh, I need to read more of Terra Australis. I thought I thought I came in knowledgeable, and evidently no.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's been a while since I've looked at this book. Definitely need to dig into it a little deeper
But
for sure.
I said it would have to have something on the Ith just because that was their stomping ground. But at the same time, there is a ton of cool stuff in there. Dang, it's got their timelines and neat stuff. Too much stuff for anybody to listen to me read through and be all like, ooh.
It's a good motivation to go and pick up Terra Australis from Chaosium.com.
Except for the old one. Let us get it first.
Good stuff. Yeah, the I think it's really neat. I think there is a danger for power players to want to play a Yithian in a human body. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I think it could be interesting uh to do, but you're right. I think power players, it would be difficult. I think that they would also try to take advantage of future sight, which I think it does bring up a story like they don't necessarily know that it's going to rain next Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They know that in the 20th century, uh, we went to the moon and there was atomic warfare, and like it's very broad strokes
Yeah. Yeah. They're
versus
aware
who
of
who
like
won the playoffs or
the
something.
big spark occurred at this time, which is a nuclear bomb, right?
Yeah. Uh,
And I would think for sure if a keeper was so inclined to maybe set up a one shot scenario where players are Yithians in human bodies, that's a pulp scenario. That's a pulp game, I think, for sure.
yeah. Now, I've always wanted to do, and I've like conceptualized. I've always wanted to do a scenario that was humans in Yithian bodies, and I actually wanted to have an adventure where the humans are in the giant snail bodies, and they have to do some sort of a mission while they're kind of. It's not really that they're prisoners because it talks about you could go everywhere, but the Yithians are aware that these are human bodies, and it is like, hey, you need to protect Bob's body. He's going to want that back. Uh, but they're like, you can't really damage anything. I always wanted to do like some sort of heist or some sort of thing that you are doing in these snail bodies, where you're like hiding something for you to come back and pick up 400 million years later. But I think that could be really cool because if you make your characters like, who cares what your jump is? You ain't got no legs. Um, or who cares what your physical stats are, because once the adventure starts you're all of a sudden in this like giant super strong creature. That like that I think that would be kind of awesome. But as far as humans playing one, no, I
Yeah.
think it could be done, but I think it would be risky at your idea of like the power gamers, or uh how much magic they know, because they do know certain spells, and they have a lot of magic technology knowledge because their cults, when they send them back, it isn't a spell, there is a device
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they built. And the hero talked about like somebody was visiting him and they built this machine, and then the guy came over, set the machine up, something happens, the guy packed up the machine and left, and then he woke up and had forgotten the previous 8 years or so. So it's not a spell as much as they have to get to the future, build a thingamajiggy. They have to build their mental fax machine to fax their mind back home. But I also think it would be interesting. What if in an adventure you have the player characters come across one of those mental fax machines, right? Like one of the cults has it.
Yeah. The
And,
tabula rasa device.
and the player characters don't know what it is or it does, or they're trying to investigate somebody that had something crazy happen because they were messing with it. And because it's super science technology that could cause the PCs to mentally swap with something if they're just twisting dials, or they're called in to fix the fact that somebody went in and they found this machine and they were twisting dials because they were trying to sell it to a pawn shop or something. Who knows?
Well, I also thought about what if you end up finding the tabula rasa device that contains your missing memories and you're able to re upload them into your head,
Okay.
right? The adventures that the Yithian had for, 10 minutes or 10 years while he was possessing your body, those memories got pulled out so that you wouldn't be driven mad with that dual personality kind of thing going, but they're still on that device, right? They're on that hard drive, and you can upload them back into your skull, and then you get your point of view and your senses of what you were doing, but it's somebody else's thoughts that you're listening to.
Huh. Could you use that in the Matrix sense of I know kung fu? Like,
I would think so. That would be
could,
amazing.
could you like literally jack skills in like you would in like a cyberpunk game or something,
Yeah.
where it's all like I don't know how to do this, and then you pull up like let me get the memories of so and so, and like
Yep.
boom, I know kung fu, or I know how to
I
sail this
like it.
ship.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be badass. That'd be very
That would
cool.
that could be cool. Or the concept if you were doing some sort of I think it would be interesting if you would have multiple personality type characters. It's like they're inhabiting the same body. It certain things could activate or deactivate who you're talking to,
Hmm.
or thing that could be interesting. I would have to really think about how to make that a playable thing. It could be cool at NPC, but it's kind of like playing a Yith. Like it could be a great NPC, but as a PC,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
careful there.
Agreed.
Uh,
I was thinking about you said, players in the Yithian bodies, in the conical bodies, in the past, and having to do a heist or something there. You could, as you mentioned earlier, hey, if a Yithian dies in a human body, that Yithian consciousness dies, and the human who was swapped out into the Yithian conical body is trapped there. But because it's a human consciousness, they don't have full control of like all the Yithian abilities. Certainly, they don't have the ability for mental swap time travel, so they're trapped in the past. When they would get a sense, like, because I'm sure it just like a small office and rumor flies immediately, like, oh my gosh, Dweezil has traveled to 1920s humanity, and there's a new human in the clan. I want to go talk to him. And that guy who's trapped, he would probably be the biggest Debbie Downer, you know, trying to
oh
like,
God,
oh, it's so terrible that you're here. Your Yithian's going to die and you're going to be stuck here with me. So you may as well start getting used to it. So you're going to be my buddy now, and I'm going to show you the ropes. And then, of course, as it happens every time, the Yithian doesn't die, and now the human's gone, and now he's talking to Dweezil again. He's like, oh, man, why couldn't you have died in the past? I want a companion. I want a friend.
what if? Okay, so you've got your character from the 1920s or whatever, or the 19 teens, right? And their human body got killed, and they're down there, and they're like, this sucks. And then a character from let's say the 1920s, close enough, because in Yithian times like that, it's like, oh yeah, that was like the same week. When for us it was 10, 15 years separate. And it's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure out how to swap minds with this Yithian. And with the what of the future comes back to retrieve its old body, it's my mind. And I will go back to the 1920s or 30s, whatever this dude came from, and he'll be trapped here. So you could have it where he's like the villain is a human whose human body died of the future, and his whole scheme is he's going to try to get a tabula rasa or something to swap minds with that particular Yithian.
He just wants to go back to civilization. He wants to eat a hot dog. He wants to go to Wrigley Field. He wants something, right?
Yeah, that could be cool. As far as who is the villain, is this jerk who has figured out how to swap minds with the Yithian body with another person, and then ride that ride back home when the Yithian's future mission is done. So I think that's awesome.
That's kind of cool. I like it.
Because that's how you could. I think that yeah, I could work with that. I'll have to think about that, but I like the idea of, or that's how your supervillain is born.
Right.
Of
Yeah. Yeah.
where it's like so and so was normal, then they started acting weird, and then one day they acted different weird, and they were evil, and that's when like they had set up their own caches of stuff to go retrieve, and when they got back to their body, like some hidden place that would be safe for 400 million years or whatnot. So they pop up in their new human body, which is somebody else's, and like the first thing they do is like, march off to Australia or wherever it was that was hidden and that they knew from researching future history would be untouched over that time, to
Yep.
retrieve some cool gizmos or knowledge that he could use. And all of a sudden you got the supervillain, and it's this bizarre elaborate backstory that began with he was originally a taxi driver in Paris who got taken over and is now the multi-billionaire uh, tech guy who had all these just weird things happen. And it's just because, like, well, I had this adventure and I had to steal another guy's body. Sucks for him.
And this is how we get the Watchman's Osmandius.
Yes,
I like it. I like it. Yithians are super cool. They're super cool.
I think they're highly imaginative. They're very very alien. Like everything about them is alien. It's one of the things I love about a lot of Lovecraft's monsters is, uh, and it's only been recently in like the past 30 years that you could really even film them, because they you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do them. You couldn't do this as a dude in a rubber suit, uh,
Nah.
and they're such a creepy weird monster. But
Yeah.
at the same time, they don't chase you down and eat you. They're kind of like, oh yeah, you're the pest that moved into our world during that period that we weren't living there. Kind of like the summer home, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, those 3 months, those 3 seasons of the year, we weren't taking over the summer home. These little pest things moved in, and
These
they were kind of interesting.
squatters.
Yeah, these squatters, and it's like, but we'll come back next summer, and yeah, and I think that's kind of how they view humans. It's like, it was unoccupied. We Airbnb'd it to these humans for a bit, and then we moved back in once they were done. But they helped us build our future bodies, and they're awesome.
They are awesome. Awesome. Well, I think that was really cool.
Yeah.
Well, we have some new patrons we'd like to thank.
Ooh,
Want to say, give a shout out to Xander Ford. Thank you for your support.
thank you, Xander, and also a special thank you to Sean Sandquist. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you so much. Also to Mike Meyer. Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate your support.
Thank you very much, Mike. And then, oh my God, man, you gave me the. As a Skorkowski, I always feel really bad when I mispronounce names. So I apologize in advance. But thank you to Martin Huschuber.
That's what I would have said. Hugh Schober.
Huschuber? I am probably butchering that so bad.
Probably.
As a Skorkowski, I'm very sensitive, but I'm also kind of immune to like whatever. So thank you, Martin.
Yes.
I
Thank you,
am sorry
Martin.
for butchering your name, most likely.
And I will say thank you to our online handle name of Targrad. Thank you, Targrad.
That's not an online handle. That's a Yithian.
Oh, well. All right. Thank you,
Yes.
Yithian.
Thank you, Targrad. And please tell me who won the playoffs. And special thank you to Brad Kelly.
Yes. Thank you, Brad. Brad's actually a friend of mine. He lives here in Kansas City. So thank you, Brad.
Oh,
And
great.
yeah, good guy. And thank
And
you, Cantho.
also a Yithian. Thank you, Cantho. And Soon Nielsen. Is it Soon or Sune?
I think it would be Sune.
Sune Nielsen. Thank you, Sune.
Thank you, Sune. And finally, a big thanks to Joseph Harding. Thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph.
I also wanted to let people know that I recently had one of my drive-through RPG scenarios promoted to a print-on-demand book. So you could get Of Wrath and Blood, which is it was designed to be a sequel to the classic Call of Cthulhu introductory scenario, The Haunting. So you could play The Haunting and then follow up with Of Wrath and Blood. So it's available as a print on demand book. And we'll have links in the show notes to that.
Congratulations on that. That is
Thank you, sir.
that is very cool.
A lot of fun. A lot of fun.
And you said it's with Miskatonic Repository. Well, we also with Miskatonic Repository have our artifacts book that we put together. Was it last year? Time has become
I
meaningless to
know
me.
it's very wibbly wobbly, yeah, but it's been a little while.
But where we immortalized several of our patrons with the Book of Mythos artifacts, because John and I over the course of like 8 9 months assembled a bunch of really cool items for well, Call of Cthulhu or just other horror games.
Hmm.
And when we're like, what do we name this? Who designed it? We're like, let's turn to our patrons. And so we immortalized many of them as the creators or victims or people who were involved in the history of these unusual devices and artifacts that you could put into your
Yes,
games.
there's some really cool stuff in there. So
There were, and I will always forever remember the 2 a.m. story if I open up the share drive to write something, and you're like, Seth, what are you doing here? It's like I woke up with an idea. I was like, "What are you doing here, John? This is awkward."
yeah, we meet online again. Well, we cannot do this show alone. We want to thank our amazing editors, Max Mahafa and Edwin Nagy, for their hard work and keen skills in making us sound awesome. You're really going to be putting in the work, I'm afraid, for this episode. So thank you guys. We really, really do appreciate it.
We also want to thank John Sumrow for our badass logo. He's a very talented artist, so please follow him on Facebook and check out his official website. And please consider joining his Patreon account. Links below in the show notes.
And finally, we want to thank the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. If you're a fan of Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu RPG, then you really need to check out the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. We'll have links to their Bandcamp site and their official band site. So thank you guys.
Thank you for listening.